All right, hi everybody. I think I'm going to start since it's 2. Welcome to Business 101, Business Planning for Indie Theatre. This is the 4th in our TITC workshop series. And hopefully I'm going to cover some stuff that most people who have been in indie theatre haven't really been able to be exposed to, but is nevertheless very useful as we start to put out our own art and make our own companies. So I am Conor Fitzgerald. I am currently a law and MBA student at York University. That's at Schulich School of Business and Osgood Law School. I also graduated about seven years ago with a Bachelor of Commerce from the University of Alberta. Since then, I've been working in indie theatre. I am the chair and treasurer of Bygone Theatre and the co-founder with Emily Dix of the TITC. So in that 5 years, I've focused primarily on business in the arts, including film and television. So just quickly, we do this every time, an overview of the TITC. It's a company that's primary purpose is to support and provide infrastructure to independent artists in Toronto. So it's a community-based program. Everything that we do is volunteer. Everything that we give is unpaid. We just want to give infrastructure and help different indie companies grow and improve. We're hoping to grow even more soon. Right now we are setting up our Indie Awards, so please check out our page for more information about that. You can get involved on the TITC.ca on our Facebook page. There's a members only section where we post a lot of information and questions about how we want the TITC to grow. So make sure you follow, and join that group. So now we'll get into it. So business planning is something that you really only get trained in if you are going to business school. And most of the people who do that end up going into more lucrative fields than independent theater. And even in arts and culture as a whole, you don't see a whole bunch of people who are trained in business planning. So just to give a quick overview of what I'm talking about, the business planning is really what we do to build or grow a company. So it's defining what the company is, basically thinking of the company as its own entity, as almost a person that has its own values, thoughts, feelings, that can exist without the people inside of it. Obviously, the people inside a company are the most important thing, and they're really what ends up defining this, but a company should exist outside of it. And I say that because in arts organizations especially, we have a tendency to have an artistic mind or vision that is basically whatever this person wants to do, which is fine on a case-by-case scenario, but in terms of building a business that you want to exist, that isn't really a good way to get more funding, to get more attention, to get more audiences. And that's what I'm hoping that this will get for everybody. So we're streaming on Facebook, and I have the chat open, so at any time, please feel free to write in questions. I will probably, unless it's urgent, I'll address those at the end. I'm hoping this will take about an hour, and then we'll have an hour to an hour and 15, and we'll have 15 to 30 minutes for questions. So a business plan can be broken into 3 basic steps. One is goal setting. So defining what your goal is, who you serve, how your goal will be accomplished, and why stakeholders will care. I use that term stakeholders because it's more than just audiences, it's more than just donors, it's more than just sponsors, and it's more than just the artistic and creative personnel within the organization. It's all of them at once, and you have to consider that holistically if you want to build a business. In planning, that involves collecting data, setting your mission, mandate, and values, creating a communications plan, which is often, that's marketing and advertising, and then creating a financial plan, which is probably one of the more difficult ones, and involves a lot of research into what things cost and that sort of thing. I've included in the resources a template that is a 5-year and a 1-year plan, just to give at least a starting point for people who haven't done financial plans about the sort of costs and revenues that you should be considering as you plan a business. The final stage is execution. So of course, after you have everything on paper, you've defined what your business is, one of the hardest things is actually getting that done. So if you set accomplishable goals, then you should be able to measure how you're accomplishing those goals, find successes, and find where you can improve, adapt, overcome. And this also involves activating those stakeholders that I talked about earlier. So when we talk about goal setting in business, we're really talking about foundational questions about what you are and what you want to achieve. So my experience in the arts, that can really be artistic goals, social or value-based goals, or economic goals. So artistic goals are fairly obvious. Those are the ones that as artists we come to naturally. You know, you want to say something, you want to express something that's individual artistically, or perhaps is conceptually artistic, a broader vision. Social or value-based goals are becoming ever more important, but those would be something like to promote underserved voices, to promote diversity, to promote accessibility, sustainability. Those sorts of goals, those are also incredibly important. And finally, economic goals, and that is just basically making money, selling tickets, serving audiences. That's a bit more of an external goal, whereas artistic and social-based goals are internal. So artistic and social-based goals, you're thinking about what you are and what you care about. Economic goals, you're thinking about how we can reach and grow and just become larger, and generally economic goals serve to heighten your artistic and social value goals. But these goals basically form your reason to be. It's the foundation of your business, and it's what you are. I mean, really, you can do the same thing psychologically for yourself and say, what am I? Like, everyone has that personality inside, and it sounds cheesy, but that's kind of the first place to start when you're thinking about a business. Is, if this was a person, what would it be? Like, who would it be? And literally, some marketers will draw a little person and say, this is a person who likes this and that and that. And even though it's a business, that's still very useful when you go forward in making some decisions. So just some examples. With Bygone, our goals are artistic and economic primarily, at least at the start. We've added in, as we've grown, social and value-based goals. But when we started the company, we wanted to serve an audience. We wanted to sell tickets. We wanted to have people come out to our plays. So that's an economic goal. And then secondly, Emily, the artistic director and founder, wanted the shows to be written about or during the early 20th century with a cinematic aesthetic. Now that's a very specific artistic conceptual goal that allows us to expand in different directions. An artistic goal can be more narrow, like literally just serving the vision of the artistic director, but you still have to think about how that interacts with other pieces of the business. Social value-based goals of the TITC, our sole goal for the TITC is to provide infrastructure for Toronto indie theater artists and companies, and that means all. So it's 100% a social company. we look to have funding simply to serve those values. So it has nothing to do with paying salaries, although one day hopefully we can, but really when we're setting goals, it's all about providing services. So that means we approach things in a very different way. So I've set up this flow chart to try to get into the mindset of how you go about finding what it is that your company is and how you can set those goals. So I know that's the starting place is usually the hardest. So 2 questions that I usually ask myself in a very overarching sense is, what can you do better than anyone else? And what's a reasonable expectation for accomplishing a goal? Those are really broad questions and aren't easy to just answer. You might have an idea, a conceptual general idea of, I want to produce X kind of theater, and I want to have X kind of operating funding within 5 years. Like, those are 2 broad conceptual goals, but how you actually boil those down into something that you can measure and determine whether you succeed at them or not, that's where the other questions go in. So first, what do you do better than anyone else? How do you find that out? Because you might think you do something better, but then when you dive into it, somebody's already doing that very well. So there's basically 2 streams. What is nobody else doing? So if it's actually a new type of theater, a new technology, a new concept for artistic creativity, that's this sort of stream. But then you have to ask yourself, why is nobody doing it? Because it might not be possible with current technology. It might be too expensive to do. There might not be a market at all. People might not want to do it, which is fine. You can still have that goal, but you have to realize that you're not going to get any money if people don't want to see it. And art is a funny little industry where that's totally valid to make art for the sake of making it art. That's how culture is made, and it may become relevant later. But you can't expect to make something that a market doesn't want and have people pay you to see it. It's it's that trade-off, and it's fine to do. So if somebody else does it, who else does it? And then you can ask yourself, what don't they do well? Do they have the same goals or the same practice as me? Can I do it better, faster, or cheaper than them? If they have the same goals or the same practice, is it better to just join with them, see if you can enhance their current offering? That's definitely a cheaper and faster way to start making art. If I make a company, can I do a co-production with them? Can we combine forces and make an even better project and both grow together? And it's important at that point then to ask what exactly is different and the same. And we'll get into that in the planning stage. But at this point, you're just trying to get broad overviews of what am I? What do I care about? What are my values? What is this company going to be? So then, once you have that what, then you're talking about timelines. How do you accomplish it? How long will it take, and how much money will it take? So to do that, you can ask, what does accomplishment actually look like? Does that mean how much money you have in the bank? How many shows you're putting on? How much your budget is for a show? How many people you have hired? What kind of salaries you're paying to people? How many people come to see your show? Just what does it look like? What's important to you? And you just figure that out at this first step. And then you say, what are milestones I can set to get there? Nothing happens overnight, so you have to think about growth. So if your goal is to have a sellout of 100 seats, the first step might be to sell out 20 seats. Then the next step might be to sell out 40 seats. And then the next step might be to sell out 80 seats. Those are steps that you can take so that you can say, I'm in the right path. I'm doing the right things. If I'm not accomplishing those goals, then I have to rethink what I'm doing to accomplish my goals. And finally, then, once you set those goals, how much money, time, and engagement of personnel is required. Who do you need? How much is it going to cost? And how much time is it going to take? And you have to be very realistic at this point. And important to note that business planning is an ongoing process. So just because you set in year one your some 5-year plans, 3-year plans, whatever it is you decide where you want to be in X amount of time, if you aren't accomplishing those step-by-step goals that you set out for yourself in that second question, then you can reevaluate. Every year you should be looking back at your business plan and say, what did I do well? What didn't we get done? How can we change what we're doing so that we can be back on track? And those are the sorts of things that having something laid out allows you to evaluate where you are, rather than just saying, like, I feel like I'm doing well, or, oh, that show did well, but then the next show didn't. It's much easier to compare, contrast, and reevaluate and continue planning as you continue to grow. So now we'll get into planning. So this is really the building stage. If the last stage was setting the foundation, I used a construction metaphor because it's easy. But that's the basement, right? You can't build a house at all if you haven't answered those questions. If you don't know what you are, then you can't plan on how to be that. So this is building what you actually are. So I've set out 4 general stages, and the first step is the longest and the hardest. So I'm going to go through that. I'm going to show you some ways in which you can gather that data and do the analysis that you need in order to find what you are, and then I'll describe number 2, 3, 4, which is applying that information. So this first step is collecting and analyzing data. So you have to find out who you're serving, your target market, who's going to care about your art, who wants to see your art. That's going to be a number of different people. So an audience is only one part. That's also sponsors, who's going to care about your purpose, who's going to care about your plan. That's also donors. Are you in a community that's wealthier? Are you in a community that's underserved? But that's largely about demographics, which include the best predictor of demographics and what people do is actually education level. There's also income level. There's also race, gender, and all those. I know that those are worse predictors of what people actually do. As I said, education is the best single predictor, and generally in theater as a whole, we tend to see older people who are better educated engaging with theater. Now, of course, it all is going to depend on your goal, but you have to understand that certainly if one of your goals is to sell tickets, then that's going to be the people who are going to buy it. If one of your goals is to get out a social message, you may also want to consider that those are some of the people that you want to change their mind about your message. So when you're planning these sorts of things, you have to understand not only who is going to be able to help you grow, but also who you want to talk to, who you want to start conversations with. Next one is competitors, and I'll get a little bit into using what's called Porter's 5 forces of competitive marketplaces. So competitors, we might immediately think of other indie theaters, but the TITC is a great example, and one of the things we're trying to show is that other indie theater groups aren't competitors. And I say that because if you look at that first page, the target market, who's out there looking for indie theater, or looking for theater in general, that's a fairly large market, and there isn't enough indie programming or there is enough indie programming to go around, basically. The market is big enough to serve all of us. So we're not competing with each other for ticket sales. Generally, people who buy theater tickets to multiple shows per year. So I'll talk about how to analyze competitive markets in just a second. So I already talked about potential funders, but if you're more social oriented or artistic oriented, then you're definitely looking more at grants. If you're economic motivated, then you might want to look at private donors, sponsors, and those sorts of things, because those donors, sponsors are looking more for exposure, relationships, and that will also influence how you structure your business, which I won't talk about here, business structure, because it could be a whole other talk on itself. There is an article on Stage Door TO that I've written about different types of businesses and the benefits and drawbacks of each of those. But this would be the stage where you start thinking about that, because your goals will define how you structure that as well. And then finally, this will all culminate in what we call a SWOT analysis, which is your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, threats aren't like, it's not physical threats, it's not threats from your competition, it's just general market threats, and I'll talk about that in a second. And I'll get back to stage 2, 3, and 4 in a second. So Porter's 5 forces, this is a business concept that has basically driven business planning since it's been invented. I don't know of somebody who's a strategic planner who doesn't use Porter's 5 forces when they're analyzing the marketplace. So there are 5 forces: competitive rivalry, supplier power, buyer power, threat of substitution, and threat of new entry. So those 5 forces all interact to determine how you consider positioning your particular company within a market that already has a bunch of companies. So competitive rivalry is considering how much similar firms compete, how many there are, and how strong they are. So when we talk about competition, that's about resources. So resources are very broad, a very broad term, because oftentimes we think of resources solely as bums and seats, which of course is very important. But in indie theater, the resources we compete for are rights to plays, which are often only given out to a single company per year. We're certainly not given out for 2 plays to be going on at once. The creative personnel, the production people, the space, all of these are finite resources that we compete for, that we might not think about. The other resources that you have to consider are a share of people's time, which is a stranger one, but it's a much more productive way of thinking about audiences than just number of tickets sold, because more and more people are using the internet, Netflix, and all of these sorts of digital and easily accessed entertainment pieces. So what we're competing for in an audience perspective is actually more to get them to come to theater as a whole than it is to get them to come to our show over another show. Though there is definitely a market where we're competing for audiences, perhaps in the lower income. That's why you see a lot of ticket discounts for lower income people, because it's better to get people in the habit of going out to shows than it is to compete for them to come to only your show. Overall, these are long-term planning goals. So, as I've said before, the TITC's aim is actually to redefine how we think about competitive rivalry. Most of what I've been saying has been trying to say that we're not competing against each other. though there is still in the market a higher competitive rivalry than really there should be if you look at the rest of the market. There is room for all of us, and if we grow the industry of independent theater, then all of us will see more sales. So that's important to think about, but you're still competing for, since we have very limited money, getting the best people on board, getting good actors and all that sort of stuff. So it's good to think about what contacts you have and how you fit in that competitive rivalry, how you stack up against other companies, and also how you stack up against substitutions, which we'll get to in a second. So supplier power is how much power do people supplying resources have, and how easy is it for those suppliers to drive the prices up. So there is in indie theater, again, because we don't have market power in terms of money, there is a high supplier power, especially when we look at venues and creatives who are sought after, award winning, those creatives that will drive audience sales, reviews, and those sorts of recognition. So because the general competitive landscape is like that, we have to consider how we overcome that. Like, so if we don't have economic power, then we have to think of other benefits that we can give. And of course, banding together with the TITC gives the buyers more market power because we're stronger together. And that brings us to buyer power. So again, the inverse, how easy is it for buyers to drive prices down? I think there's an irony in indie theater because most of us are actually trying to drive the prices up, because oftentimes we're asking for volunteers and we're asking for favors, and we're asking for from the people at least, and we're trying to raise enough money so that we can actually drive those prices up. And that is, I think, a separate consideration from what we're talking about here. So I think the biggest thing that we have to think about is that we individually, as a group of 4 artists, for example, don't have a lot of power to get discounts in venues or to get discounts for rentals. They may have, there may be discounts for nonprofits or for small groups, or I know CanStage has residency programs. There are ways that you can sneak in some power, but again, if you work together with other companies, then that's going to give us more power to demand, space that we can afford and all that sort of stuff. But again, we have to enter the market knowing that we don't have a lot of negotiation power and that we might have to adapt to what's there. Threat of substitution. How easy is it for customers to find another way to get what you provide? So this really, I think, is the main concern when entering the indie theater space. But you have to, but I think the most important thing is this frames how you are going to set your goals and how you're going to communicate your goals to your audience. So indie theater could be considered general entertainment. It could be considered live entertainment, or it could be considered an experience. So depending on where you fall into that, you have different substitutions. So general entertainment, that's that share of time I was talking about before. That's Netflix, movies, sports, both watching and playing, video games. Again, a share of leisure time when people aren't working. They only have so much time and they want to do it getting as much joy out of their life as they can. So in that larger market, working together to boost that up, that's a really great thing. In terms of live entertainment, we have other theaters. So that could be large theaters like Mirvish, Soul Pepper, Stratford, and those take up the vast majority of the theater going market. So again, working together to get people to consider indie theater as an alternative that is the same, just as good as Stratford or Soul Pepper or Mirvish, that's a difficult thing to do. Not that it isn't as good, because I've seen a lot of indie theater and I've seen a lot of professional theater, and I don't think the amount of money that goes into a show has anything to do with the quality of the art. So again, working together as indie artists to say, listen, we can produce the same quality of show, you know what you're going to expect going into it, is one way to drive audiences up. The other market to consider is for experiences. Indie theater is something that you have to go to and you interact with. Even if you're just watching a live show, you're interacting with it in a different way than you are a movie. I think a lot of us who love theater, that's one of the things we love most about it. So in that way, we're actually competing with escape games, zoos, rock climbing gyms. A new trend is for AR and VR experiences. Anything where a person is interacting directly with the experience, we still have to consider as indie artists. So thinking of where you fall on the spectrum, of course, and how you relate to those experiences can help you form goals, but also how you communicate. If we start communicating more that this is an experience and something different, something that is going to an indie show is, you know, that something new every time, which is generally, I think, what people want out of experiences, then that can help drive your goals and build your business. The final one is threat of new entry. How easy is it for a new company to enter? In an indie theater, this is very easy because artistic content is individual. So when you look at other industries, you might have huge startup costs where you have to buy a bunch of machinery, you have to start manufacturing, you have a bunch of salaries. Indie theater, it's possible to put on a one-person show in a park. So the potential startup cost is zero. And therefore there is a lot of indie theaters going on. So you have to find a way to differentiate how you're starting out, because you have because it's so easy to enter, you have a lot of different companies who are entering in the same way, doing the same sort of art, doing a very broad mission or mandate that encompasses whatever they want to do. So because it's easy to enter, it's really important to differentiate and really bear down and understand what it is that you do better and what value you give to the community and to the industry. So that is the main driving force of doing these business plans. I'll also generally comment that the entertainment industry is a very weird one, and it's been analyzed over the years by many, many scholars in being an industry that operates unlike any other, because the product is intellectual property, so it doesn't have any inherent value. That is, the things that go into it can't just be broken up and sold for money. The value is all assigned to it by people. So because of that, the people decide what its value is after it's been created. So you have to create something, put it out there, and see if people like it. So it's a very difficult industry to get into, and it's hard to measure success. So it's very important that you really define as narrowly as you can what you do, how you're going to achieve it, and what you want to see as growth. So then we get into SWOT analysis. So as I said, this is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So by asking those questions in the goal setting, and then going through Porter's 5 forces and seeing how you fit in with the other companies, then you can start making lists about your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So in those Porter's, while you're doing that Porter analysis, you should be looking at what other companies are doing, who exists, why do people like Netflix and YouTube? Why do people like rock climbing? Why do people like zoos? What is it that people really want? And specifically, what do the people that you want to talk to want? So once you've gone through that process, then you can say, so what am I good at? Why am I unique? Do I have unique people? Do I have unique goals? Do I have unique art? What is it? Do I have a unique technology? Those are all things that could be huge strengths for you. On the opposite side of that is threats. So what might get in the way of those strengths succeeding? What might stop your success? Who might stop your success? Is there something that could happen that could completely derail your plan? If you're relying wholly on a unique, interesting person and they decide to leave the company, do you have a backup plan? Is your company strong enough to withstand that? That's what we're trying to think of is threats are threats to your strengths. So whatever your strength is, you have to consider what could diminish that. On the other hand, weaknesses, what aren't you good at? Be very honest. It's fine. Nobody's good at everything, and you should be honest about what you aren't good at. Also, what might people judge you for? In indie theater, this is often being young or inexperienced, being cheap, I say, which means not being able to pay industry rates, asking for volunteers, doing profit shares, being struggling to find diversity within your casting, struggling to juggle the fact that we have, you end up doing 5 jobs, you end up doing your social media, and you have to keep up with the world media, but you're also trying to plan a show, and you're also trying to run a business. These are all things that will hamper your success. But then you have to think, what opportunities are there to overcome those weaknesses? What is it that we can improve on? Is there something that nobody's doing? Is there a technology that we can use to overcome the weaknesses? Is there a group like the TITC that can help us to mix our, to combine resources and then be able to do something larger? So thinking about opportunities as ways to overcome your weaknesses and threats as those things that could counteract your strengths will really help you frame building a strong business. Because generally people find it easy to identify their strengths, but don't think of what happens if something goes wrong. And similarly, you might be able to identify what you're not going to get any good at, but then you just ignore it and say, well, that's just not part of our business. But the reality of being in a business market is that you're always going to interact with a bunch of different things. So finding ways that you can improve on those weaknesses and turn them into strengths is what opportunities are. But I do have to warn you that 80% approximately of all businesses, and this is in the for-profit world, don't make money in at least 3 years. I've heard some stats say that it's 5 years. So in nonprofit, we shouldn't really expect growth to be fast. So even if you have a great plan, it might be frustrating and it might be expensive. But having that plan and understanding that that might happen allows you to plan your entire life
in a way that can allow this to succeed. If this is something that's important to you, if this is something that you really want to build, then asking hard questions and understanding the road is the best way to succeed. So now that we've collected and analyzed that data, we've put it into, we know what the competitive landscape is because of Porter's 5 forces, and we know what we are because of our SWOT analysis. Now we can actually start saying what our business is. So the first step of that is to set your mission, mandate, and values. And this should be based on your data, but also about those goals that you set earlier. So what will you do? Who will you serve? Where will you serve? How will you do it? And what do you care about? That's what's going to define your mission, mandate, and values. Writing a mission statement is actually an art form in itself. Mission statements, generally, the rule is that it should be no longer than 2 sentences. Your first sentence should say who you are, where you serve, what people you serve, and your core of what you do. The second sentence should elaborate on that by providing more tangible ways that you do that. So, Bygone Theatre serves Toronto, the people of Toronto, by creating 20th century theatre with a film aesthetic. We do so by providing educational opportunities in history about the theatre and the 20th century, by producing shows that are written in or during that time frame, and by hiring diverse actors. I actually forget my own mission statement, so please go to bygonetheatre.com and click on our mission mandate and see. That's something that Emily and I took a full day, a full 8-hour day, the two of us, to write. It's something that I think a lot of people think is just like, oh, I want to do this thing, and they'll just write that and say, this is my mission. But if it's broad, if it's too broad, and if it's not thought through, then you're setting yourself up to have lofty goals that you can accomplish. So be as specific as you can. Use that data that you've collected to say who you want to serve. Use that data to say how you want to serve them, and think about what are actionable things that you can do that will help you to accomplish those goals. A mandate is a bit broader. That's where you're talking about how you're going to serve your mission. So you can get very in depth about different programs that you want to do, about different people that you're bringing on board, how you're interacting with people, whatever you feel is the best way to communicate to the rest of your company, to your communities, what your mission is and how you're serving that mission. That's what a mandate is. Values is a newer strategic tool. It was most famously used by Netflix to develop a corporate culture. So what values are, again, going back to that idea that a company is a person in itself. Values are what that person holds dear. So what is it? What's the core? What could never, ever not happen in your company? So that could be diversity. That could be, for Bygone, one of ours is history, community, these sorts of values. Like what is it that you are at your core that will never, ever break? So it's important to define those and give good thought to them, because the most important thing of any of these things, mission, mandate, and values, is when you set them, that is now how you
answer every single question about your company. If somebody says, do you want to do X or Y? You think, what does my company want? It's not what you want. What does my company want? What serves my mission, my mandate, and my values the best? If it doesn't in any way, then it's gone. So this step is crucial in developing a business. Once you have that, so now, after all that work, you finally have what your business is. At its core, it's created. You have a business. But now you have to get it out into the world. So you create a marketing or communications plan. So you have to think of how you're going to reach your audience, through what channels. That could be social media, it could be print or online advertising. It could be events in the community. Whatever gets your name out there is part of the marketing and communications plan. Then after you decide how you're going to talk to them, you have to decide what you want them to know about you. So this is going to be defined by your mission, mandate, and values. It should be short, precise language that has how you should start thinking about communications is like the movie Inception, essentially. What is the thing that I want them to know about me? And then you work backwards. What are phrases that can lead them to that? So if you're saying, for Bygone, I want people to know that we are 20th, I want people to say like, great 20th century theater. How do I communicate that to them? Because great 20th century theater is nebulous. Like, what does it actually mean? You say accurate sets, full production values, great acting, like these sorts of like strong statements about what you do that you can back up. That's how you communicate to your stakeholders. And then think about, why do they need to know this? Because there's lots of things that we might think people should know this about me, but there isn't actually a reason for them to know it. So if your audience that you're communicating to doesn't actually, if there's no stats to show that they care about a certain piece of your business, then there's no need to communicate to it. The reason for communicating is to get people invested in your business. And that can be monetarily invested, that could be a time investment, that could be any number of things that you need to grow. So now that you've figured out how you're going to talk to people, now you have to create a financial plan. So again, you have to set a time frame to accomplish these goals. Generally, I like to create financial plans for 5-year sections. You plan your cash flows. Generally, what I do to plan cash flows, and you can see in the template that's on TITC.ca/resources, I put a 5-year template and a 1-year template. So usually for the next year that I'm planning, I go month by month. And then for 5 years, I just do year by year. So a lot of these are going to be estimates. For your next year, you should have very concrete numbers. So you should say, if you put something down in that plan, you are going to do it. And if it's contingent on getting funding, then you have to have that thought of, what if I don't get the money to do this thing that I want to do? How am I going to counteract, again, strengths versus threats? If I need a grant to be able to put on this show and I don't get the grant, that's a threat. So what am I going to do if I don't get the grant? Am I just going to say, oh, the season's done? Or do I have another way to present that idea in another venue for cheaper, to a different audience, whatever it might be? Do a workshop, do a training seminar, do something. But thinking about alternatives to your plan is always very useful. And I can't stress it enough, you have to be realistic. It's setting a goal for fundraising of $10,000. might solve all your problems. It might give you a very nice outlook. But if you've never raised $10,000 before, then that's not a realistic goal to set. So you want to start with something that is achievable again. And then when you're looking at future years, you're looking at achievable growth. So for instance, if I'm saying this is year one of fundraising, this is a brand new company, and we feel like we have a really good show to put on, I'm going to set my my donation to $1,000, because I'm fairly sure that $1,000 I can achieve. Then the next show, you might say, okay, I achieved that $1,000, so it's probably reasonable for me to now raise $1,500 or $1,100. I generally use 10% for larger numbers, and maybe a bit more for smaller numbers. But again, you have to actually think about where you're getting this money from, how it can come in, and what you need, what work needs to be done in order to make that happen. If you make an assumption that's just like, I think I can raise $1,000, then you have to note that down. If something is secured, then you just write it down. That's perfect. That's great to plan on. But if you're assuming, I believe that because I have 6 months to raise money, and because a similar show was able to fundraise a few $1,000s, that's not, then you have to just note that down, why you're making that plan, so that you can go back to it and see whether or not that was a reasonable assumption to make when you're adjusting the plan next year. And so that gets to my final point, revise it as you go. So anytime that you meet a goal or you need to change a goal, then change it. There's no such thing as a fixed financial plan. You should change it within the year, and you should change it every single year. So that's very important to know, and use all of the experiences that you have in trying to accomplish your goals to set your next goals, because it just gets easier as you get more and more into it. The first year is always going to be the toughest, because almost everything is going to be a guess unless you have something secured beforehand. Yeah. So now, finally, what do we do once we have this business plan made? You live with it. Your plan is your Bible. So I think I said this before, but it should influence every single decision you make. And if it doesn't fit, you quit. So if something does not fit within your plan, if it is too expensive, if it is outside of your values, if it is, if people aren't buying into it, if the rest of your team isn't buying into it, it doesn't fit, and it can't happen, and you have to move on. There's no reason to push something and just say, well, just this one time we can do this thing that doesn't fit with what our mission is, because that devalues all of the work you've just done and says that you're not strong in your mission. So putting everything into that mission and moving towards those goals has to be your only focus in executing a business plan. And again, I can't stress enough, setting goals that can be reached and measured as often as possible is the best way to know that you're succeeding. And being honest about when you don't succeed is also incredibly important. But personal opinion no longer matters. Now that you've created a business plan, the business is its own person. It has its own thoughts and feelings and should be able to exist without any person. So even though you just spent a year of your life making a business plan, if next year your circumstances change, but you still believe that the mission needs to happen and somebody needs to take over, they should be able to look at your business plan and say, I know what this thing is, and I can keep doing this thing, and I care about it. So it's going to keep existing in the same way. Now, there might be revisions, slight revisions on different things, and we have to adapt to what the world is telling us. But in general, that's what makes a strong company. I know in indie theater, oftentimes we go from show to show and we think of the success of the show, but sometimes the success of the show isn't as important as the success of the company. In Bygone, we've spent a lot of time building a brand so that people know the name, know what we do, and know that no matter what, this is what they're going to get out of it. Because that's how you build repeat customers, that's how you get more audiences, and that's how you continue to grow year after year. It's not by having a great show that wins 5 Doras, though that might help, if you don't follow that up with the same sort of thing. Then you had a great show, which is great, but you don't have a company, and that's very different things. One thing I just want to direct everybody to in terms of running a successful arts business. The top consultant in the arts for business, his name is Michael Kaiser. He's based out of Washington, D.C., and he runs the DeVos Institute of Arts Management. He recently did his first ever Canadian company at Can Stage. He built their 5-year strategic plan. But his planning is all based on something called the cycle. And this is a link here to their site, because this isn't something that I made. It's just, I think, the best single resource to learn about arts management that is possible. And this link takes you to a free 6-week online course in how to manage and build arts organizations. But the core of the cycle is that you need great art, which I'm sure all of us have. Great art is broad. There's different people who like different things, but at its core, it's something that people are passionate about and that tells a story and communicates with people. So you take that great art and you market it aggressively. You make sure that people know you're making it. You make sure that every person in the world knows exactly what you're making, what your mission is, why are you doing it, what are you doing, why is it great? You have to let people know. And by letting people know, you're going to find those people that care about it just as much as you do. And that's what Michael would call your family. So those are the people who will invest in you in different ways. So they might be financial investors, they might be board members, they might be collaborators, whatever it is. It's that first set, the people that you can talk to and call when you need to. Once you build that family, that's how you're going to generate revenue. So your family is now going to help you expand, bring people in, find new donors, find sponsors, make your art, get grants. All of that is just creating revenue so that you can make more great art. And then the cycle just moves, just continues repeating. So I encourage everybody to take a look at that program, or at least he also has a book called The Cycle. If you're really interested in becoming an arts administrator or manager, then it's a wonderful resource to have. And really, I could not give you better information than what's in there. So with that, that's all for my business planning workshop. I know it's a lot of information for an hour, but I have another half an hour here for you guys to ask any questions, specific questions or general questions, whatever you want to know. If you want me to expand on anything. Reasonable goals for creating a new work specifically. So you have a company and you're trying to create a new play? Well, I think when you're considering your goals, you have to start with saying, like, what is this play? How does it fit in with my company? And why am I doing it? When you start with that, then you know why you're doing it, how you're doing it, and what sort of funding you're going to approach. Goals that you would consider are how long is it going to take to write it? How long is it going to take to gather the people, the creative team? How long is it going to take to find sponsors? Those are all, because you're going to need, in creating a new work, you're going to need to create the work, to find the people who will put the work out there, to find the money to pay those people, or to rent a venue, or to do whatever. And you should also have a goal of how it fits in and builds your company as a whole. So reasonable goals are going, it's hard to answer that unless there's something specific, but reasonable goals might be based on a project that you did in the past, how much money you were able to raise. You can talk to a granting officer at any of the TAC, OAC, and Canada Council. They're incredibly helpful about telling you how to think about structuring a grant plan for funding. I know, for example, that the TAC and OAC, they generally want your grant applications to not be more than 25% of your total budget. The Canada Council, 30 to 50% they're okay with, but they're a bit more nebulous. And then understanding how grantors evaluate a project, which is primarily artistic, I believe, but then also feasibility. So having backup plans, what do you do if funding or people don't come through? And then on community impact. So who's affected by it and why they're affected. So all of those are going to funnel into setting goals and finding what is reasonable for this particular project. If it's speaking to a marginalized group, then that speaks well to community, and you might be able to set goals a little higher than if you're doing something that's that isn't as doesn't fit as diverse an audience. If you're doing something more commercial, then you have to consider who has gone to those types of shows in the past. Like, what exactly does your market look like, and how are you going to reach them? How much can you put in upfront to be able to reach people? The more you can put into that aggressive marketing before things exist, the more people you'll reach, and then you might be able to push your goals a bit higher. But again, it's a constant evaluation of how you're reaching them, and you have to know when to kind of step back. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I would say that your goals are primarily going to be timeline goals, and then and financial goals, and you have to be reasonable about your experience is going to have a lot to do with your financial goals too. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks. We spoke about social impact of a company and the social value of a company. If the company is mainly focused on the artistic value, is that bad? Should a company make an effort to spread into social value? So I'll answer that question first, and then I'll answer your second one. No, I think something that I think a lot of arts companies get caught up in is that they think they have to do it all. The reason that I set out the like thinking about it as economic goals, artistic goals, and social goals is for that exact reason, that they can be separated, that there's nothing wrong with simply wanting to put your art out there. As artists, that's one of the main things that people want to do. There's a huge argument about art for art's sake, and whatever side of the, some people think that art must be seen to be valued. That's something that you have to decide for yourself, right? What is your value? So Emily's going to come in and help me answer some of these more art questions, because I'm very much of a business background.
I've been hanging out in the other room and listening.
So it's not bad to just focus on the artistic value if that's what's important to you, but you have to be honest about what's important to you. Having social considerations might give you other benefits and reach new audiences and different audiences, and that's an important consideration. But again, you're building a business based on your own, based on what you want it to be, and anything is valid. It's also totally valid to be mervish and have no care about artistic value or social value at all, and just make money. That's fine too. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's also something that I think a lot of people in this community look down on, is people who want to make money, and there's nothing wrong with that either. So you just have to weigh your different goals and your different values, and then set them and go with that.
Yeah, and then just in addition to that, sorry, I left my speaker on and now I'm echoing weird. Asking about the best approach to hiring, paying actors wages. So, I mean, it's indie theater. People do understand that there's not endless amounts of money, but I think the main thing you need to do is to be really clear and honest up front. You can ask for volunteers. There are lots of people who will volunteer. I volunteer all the time. We couldn't run our company if it weren't for volunteers. We also have a lot of people who are tragically underpaid. But the key is going into it being really clear about what you can offer, right? All of these things are a two-way relationship. So don't kid yourself if you're a new company, even if you're an established company, really, and you're saying, oh, look, this is a great opportunity for you. You're going to get exposure, the word we all hate. That's just going to upset people. But if you say, hey, this is what we want to do, this is what we can provide, is there anybody who's interested? We'll get people. What we tend to do, especially with something like stage management, because that's something I have experience in, so I know I can kind of pick up the slack if need be, is we advertise specifically that we will take people that have no previous experience. So if you want to get involved and have a chance to stage manage a decent sized show, instead of starting as an ASM and doing coffee runs, then we'll give you that opportunity. You're going to be paid a very small amount, but there is an element of training there. And we're honest about, like I'm not a union SM, right? So if your goal is to get into equity, this is probably still not worth it for you unless you're right out of school. So you just have to be really open with all of that.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that and say that in indie arts, when we're not working with a lot of easily accessed funding, obviously grants are the best way to pay people reasonable wages. It's really the only way for us as independent artists to get enough money to pay what would be considered industry rates. But if you don't get that, that shouldn't stop you from making art. But what you have to consider is that the art itself, and this might sound mean, but it doesn't have value in itself to another person because it's your art. So what you have to think of is, what value can I provide to somebody who I need to do work on this? And that value, I think, is a better way to think about indie arts compensation than strictly monetary, because we're kidding ourselves if we think that the indie community can ever grow with an expectation that everybody is always paying industry standard rates. So you try for grants, try to pay people as much as you can. We use profit shares a lot. We use training. We use...
There's two things I'd add to that is do make friends. We had an amazing lighting designer who worked for very little money because I'd also, aside from being his friend, had done a lot of free work for him over the years, right? So
work
like,
exchange is great.
Yeah, energy exchange is really good. And I'm not sure if this is something you brought up earlier, but if you are doing a profit share, I can't stress this enough. That means that when you're making your budget, you can't just be like, okay, we think we can make $10,000, so that means we can spend $10,000. You need to plan to make a profit. And you need to be honest with the people you're working with about what needs to happen for there to be a profit. I've heard so many horror stories of people being told, oh, it's fine because we're going to profit share and we have a high percentage. And then you find out the amount of money that people spend. There was no way they were going to make a profit, and that's not fair. So if you are doing a profit share, be prepared to share your budgets with people, let them know what you're spending, show them where you're coming up with these estimates, and just be open about it. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that step, then you don't get to do a profit share. Then you need to tell people this is your flat rate, and that's what you get.
So Matthew, you said, is there a specific organizational structure that's recommended? No, I guess the flitty answer is that I can finish. The flitty answer is that the best structure is the one that promotes your mission the best, the one that accomplishes your goal the best, and the one that allows the sort of communication and interfacing that you need to accomplish those goals.
Do you want to ask him if he has a specific unconventional one, though?
I will, yeah, in a second. I was just, sorry. So necessary foundations points, yeah, it's going to totally depend. So if you do have a specific question about your organizational structure, I'd be happy to either answer it now, or you can email me or whatever, and I can see if I have an answer for you. But I mean, there's certain legal requirements if you are incorporating. You know, you need to have a chair and a treasurer and a secretary. But that can all be one person. So yeah, you just need to make sure that you're able to communicate well, that nobody is feeling shoved out and or unheard, and that your goals are being accomplished. Does that answer your question? Do you have a follow-up? I can give you, here's my, if anybody has specific questions, you can email me there. But yeah, let me know if that answered you at all. It's hard to answer an organizational structure question without knowing what the specific needs are. Any questions on Facebook? Great presentation. Awesome. Yeah, and again, if you have, I'm always open, Matthew, to if you have questions, or if your company
I offered this to another company as well, but for TITC companies especially, I'm happy, or people who want to be involved with the TITC and don't yet have a company, I'm happy to sit down on a Zoom call with you and the rest of the people to discuss things in detail if you want. And again, you can look at on stagedoorto.com. I wrote an article on the different types of like overarching business structures that and that might give you some insight as well. All right, were there any other questions? So if there's no other questions, I'll just remind everybody to like, follow the TI and share TITC. You can join as an individual member or as a company, and you can join our members only group at that point. And we share a lot more resources, links to, we promote everybody's projects on there, so it's great to be involved. And if you have ideas for other webinars that you'd like to hear, or if you want to do a webinar yourself, then you can also do that. And of course, we always are accepting donations to help the TITC run. We have costs including web hosting and marketing that we want to pay for, and so far that's just been it's mostly been out of our pockets. But
donation the other day,
we have had a few donations that have been amazing, but any help is wonderful. So if there aren't any other questions, then I will bid you all adieu. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. And I hope you all have a great day.
Bye.